It was one of those small-town diners where time seemed to slow down. The kind of place with cracked leather booths, refillable coffee, and the same 5 regulars who could name every item on the menu without looking. It was early evening, that golden hour when sunlight filters through dusty blinds and everything feels a little more honest. In booth 5 sat a man named Leonard, gray beard, heavy coat despite the mild weather, worn-out boots, and a quietness that made people curious or suspicious. He kept mostly to himself. A cane leaned against the wall beside him. He had a duffel bag that he never let out of reach and a cap that said Vietnam Veteran stitched across the front. He didn't say much, just nodded when the waitress poured his coffee and always left a few quarters on the table, like tipping was more habit than math. Leonard had been coming in every Thursday at the same time for almost 6 weeks. No one really spoke to him, not deeply, except maybe Judy, the waitress who'd been working there since she was 17. Judy always gave him the booth by the window, even if someone else asked for it. But this Thursday was different. 3 young men in their late 20s walked in, local boys, loud, laughing, the kind who never sat without making a scene first. They wore matching work jackets from the auto shop across town. One of them, Tanner, had a voice that naturally carried, or maybe he just liked attention. The other 2, Luke and Billy, trailed behind, amused by whatever trouble Tanner stirred up. When they saw Leonard sitting in that booth with his old cap and distant eyes, Tanner didn't miss a beat. He snorted and said, just loud enough, "You?" "No, they sell those vet hats online now. Pretty cheap, too." Luke chuckled. Billy looked a little unsure, but didn't say anything. Leonard didn't react. He just sipped his coffee and looked out the window like he hadn't heard. But Judy did. She came over quickly, tried to keep her voice calm. "Don't start, Tanner," she said, wiping down the counter even though it was already clean. "What?" "I'm just saying, Judy. Some people wear uniforms they didn't earn. Ain't that right, Grandpa?" Tanner turned fully toward Leonard now, arms crossed like he was waiting for a fight that wasn't coming. Leonard finally looked up, but his face gave nothing away. No anger, no fear. Just that quiet stare like he'd already lived through worse days than this one. Tanner scoffed again. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Judy looked like she wanted to say something, but Leonard gently raised a hand, not to stop her, just to let her know he was fine. For the next few minutes, the diner buzzed with its usual hum. A couple came in and sat near the back. A trucker paid for his pie and left. The bell above the door jingled each time, but no one seemed to really notice who came in. No one, until the man in the dress blues stepped inside. He wasn't young. His silver hair was cut sharp, posture straight as a flagpole. His uniform was pressed to perfection, medals clean and centered, shoes that clicked softly against the old tile. He didn't look around, didn't hesitate. He walked directly toward booth 5. The air shifted. Judy blinked. Billy whispered something to Luke. Tanner suddenly went quiet, his arms uncrossing as the man in uniform reached Leonard's table. And then something happened that made everyone forget how to breathe. The man in the uniform, a 4-star general, by the looks of his insignia, stopped at Leonard's booth. Without a word, he brought his hand to his forehead in a crisp, silent salute. Leonard didn't move for a second. Then slowly, carefully, he rose to his feet, leaning on his cane, and returned the salute with the same sharpness, the same respect. No one knew what to say. No one even dared whisper. The general lowered his hand and smiled gently. "Good to see you again, Master Sergeant." Leonard nodded just once. "Likewise, sir." The entire diner sat frozen in that moment, unsure what they'd just witnessed, but suddenly aware that they'd misjudged the quiet man by the window. The silence in the diner stretched long after the salute was over. Tanner, Luke, and Billy were still standing awkwardly near the register, their earlier smirks gone, replaced with a kind of stunned discomfort. Judy stood behind the counter, holding the coffee pot mid-air as if time had paused with her. The general didn't sit. He stood beside Leonard's booth like a man who had come not just to visit, but to bear witness. Leonard gestured lightly to the seat across from him, and the general eased himself into it with the calm of someone who had known this man a long time. Tanner cleared his throat, trying to reassert whatever control he thought he had earlier. "Wait, hold up," he said, not quite loud, but loud enough. You really know this guy?" The general didn't even turn to him. He kept his eyes on Leonard. "Master Sergeant Leonard Hayes, Vietnam, Operation Texas Star, multiple citations, including the Bronze Star. Retired after 24 years in service. I know him better than I know most." Leonard gave a quiet chuckle. "You always were better with dates than I was." Tanner shifted on his feet. "But why is he here? I mean, I thought—" "You thought what?" The general finally turned, his gaze toward Tanner. There was no aggression in his voice, no volume, but the way he said it made the room colder. "That someone like him would need your permission to exist quietly?" Tanner opened his mouth but found nothing to say. Luke looked away, and Billy, who had remained the quietest, gently backed toward the door. No one followed him. The general leaned forward now, his voice still calm, but cutting. "Do you know what it's like to serve with a man like him? He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't chase medals. He just did the hard things, day after day, without a camera or applause. Men like you don't understand that kind of silence." Leonard looked down at his hands. They were shaking a little, but not from fear, from memory. The general softened, seeing it. "You still carry that cane?" Leonard nodded. "Left leg, shrapnel, early 71, never quite healed." The general exhaled. Not quite sadness, not quite respect, something in between. "You saved 3 of my men that day. I've never forgotten that." The quiet in the diner turned reverent. Even the hum of the old fridge in the back seemed to fade away. People who had been pretending not to listen were now leaning in subtly, pretending they weren't completely gripped by what was unfolding. Judy finally stepped forward. She set 2 fresh cups of coffee down between the men. "On the house," she whispered, her voice thick. "Both of you." The general smiled at her, not politely but gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am." Leonard looked out the window for a moment, his voice barely a murmur. "You know, I didn't come here to be seen, just like the quiet, the coffee, the sun hitting the window around 6:30. "You're allowed quiet," the general said. "But not shame." Leonard didn't respond, but the lines around his eyes softened, like something heavy had lifted just a little. Outside, a few more people had gathered. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when uniforms and silence are involved, but no one came in. They just looked through the windows, watching something they didn't fully understand. Tanner turned, muttering something under his breath, and walked out, pushing past the door with a grunt. Luke followed. Only Billy stayed behind for another few seconds, eyes on Leonard. I'm sorry, sir," he said awkwardly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't know." Leonard nodded, slow but certain. "That's the thing about judging a man. You rarely do." Billy nodded. Then left. The general sipped his coffee and sat back. "How long you been coming here?" 6 Thursdays, Leonard replied. "Long enough to know the specials don't change. Long enough to feel invisible." "You were never invisible," the general said gently. "Some people just don't know how to look." The sun had started to dip below the horizon now. The last rays lit Leonard's face in gold. He closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Maybe next Thursday will feel different." And for the first time since he walked in 6 weeks ago, he smiled. The following Thursday came quietly. Leonard arrived at his usual time just before sunset. Same jacket, same cane, same calm pace as he moved toward booth 5. But this time, something had changed. Not in him, but in the air around him. People noticed. Judy smiled as soon as he stepped through the door. "Your booth's waiting, Sergeant," she said, like it was a title she'd always known but hadn't said aloud until now. Her voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had, but now it meant something. As Leonard made his way to his booth, heads turned, not in the same way they used to. Not with doubt or mockery, but with a quiet sort of respect. No one said anything directly. A man at the counter just gave him a small nod. A woman with her teenage son leaned in and whispered something, and the boy looked up with wide eyes. The table had a fresh flower on it. Judy's touch. She pretended not to notice him notice, but she did. Leonard settled in, resting his cane gently by his side. He ordered the same thing he always did, black coffee, 1 egg, wheat toast, but now it felt like everyone else knew the order too. Familiarity wrapped around him like an invisible blanket. It wasn't long before the bell above the door rang again, but this time it wasn't the general. A young man in his early 20s entered, carrying a folder and wearing a slightly oversized ROTC jacket. He looked nervous, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't sure if he was in the right place. Judy approached him, but before she could speak, the young man spotted Leonard. He walked straight over, holding the folder tightly to his chest. "Sir," he said, almost too quietly. Leonard looked up. "My dad told me you served with him. In Nam. Said I should find you. I'm going to enlist next month." He thought, maybe you'd talk to me. The entire diner quieted again, not dramatically, but naturally, like it knew something real was about to happen. Leonard gestured to the seat across from him. "You got time for cold coffee and a few stories that don't end pretty?" The kid grinned, nodding. "Yes, sir." They talked for over an hour. Leonard didn't brag, he didn't lecture, he just told the truth. About fear, about friendship, about what it means to come home and still feel like you're somewhere else. The young man listened like every word mattered. As they spoke, others came and went. Some left $1 extra on their tab without a word. Others just watched quietly. Judy refilled their coffee more times than usual, never interrupting. And then, just as the light began to fade and the street lamps blinked on outside, the bell above the door rang once more. This time it was the general. He wasn't in uniform today, just a plain jacket and slacks, but his presence still filled the room. He nodded toward Judy and made his way to Leonard's table. He looked at the young man, then at Leonard. "Recruiting now, are you?" he said with a smile. Leonard chuckled. "Just answering questions." The general sat beside them, folding his hands on the table. Funny how things come around. The three of them sat like that, a veteran, a general, and a young man preparing to serve, across decades of stories and silence. There was something unspoken between them, something powerful and patient. By the time the young man left, Leonard gave him a patch from his old duffel bag. "Didn't get me much but holes in my jacket," he said, handing it over. "But it might remind you of why you wear it." The kid held it like it was made of gold. As he left, the general watched him go, then turned to Leonard. "That boy will never forget today." Leonard leaned back, stretching slightly, the old stiffness in his leg reminding him of every mile. "Funny thing is, neither will I." Outside, the diner lights reflected softly in the glass. Inside, Leonard didn't feel invisible anymore. He felt seen, not for the uniform, not for the medals, but for the quiet kind of strength that doesn't ask for attention and earns it anyway. The next Thursday would come, he knew it would, and now, others would too. It had been nearly 2 months since the first time Leonard had walked into the diner. The booth by the window was no longer just his. It had become something more, a kind of quiet symbol. People still talked about that Thursday. The one when a general walked in and made the whole room fall silent. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. Leonard, though, never chased the attention that came after. He still came every week at 6:30, still ordered the same coffee, same toast, same seat. But now he never sat, alone for long. One Thursday, a group of middle school students came in with their teacher. They were doing a project on veterans in the community. Judy made space, arranged things just right, even pulled a couple of booths together. Leonard didn't say much at first, just listened. But when one of the kids asked, "Were you scared?" he paused. Then he answered honestly, "Every day, but we did it anyway. That's what makes it brave." Another time, a woman who'd lost her father in Iraq came over, sat down with a photograph she kept in her purse. She didn't ask for advice. She just wanted to talk. Leonard listened, eyes soft, hands folded. One evening, Tanner came back. He didn't storm in or bring friends. He came alone, shoulders lower than before. He waited by the door until Judy gave a small nod, a quiet kind of permission. He walked over to Leonard, hat in hand. "I was wrong," Tanner said. "I acted like an idiot. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Leonard looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. Takes something to come back and say that. Tanner didn't sit. He just said, "Thank you," and left. And that was enough. That's how it was now. The diner didn't change on the outside, same peeling menus, same old jukebox that skipped on track 3, but the people inside had. They had started to notice the stories sitting quietly in the corners of their lives. Leonard was one of them. A reminder that you don't have to be loud to be heard. One evening near closing time, the general returned. He came in quietly, dressed, in civilian clothes again, and slid into the booth across from Leonard like he'd done it 100 times before. "I'm retiring," he said simply. "End of the month." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" "Yeah. Thought it was time." There was a pause, and then Leonard smiled faintly. "Any plans?" The general looked around the diner, then back at him. "Thinking about sticking around. Might finally try that meatloaf you're always shaking your head at." They both laughed, and for a moment they weren't ranks or titles or years between deployments. They were just two old friends who understood more in silence than most did with words. The general leaned in, voice lower. "You know, all those years I stood in front of rooms full of men, gave speeches, sent orders. But that day I walked in here, that was the first time I ever felt like my presence mattered off the field." Leonard tilted his head. "Sometimes a room just needs reminding." The general nodded slowly. "You're still doing that, every Thursday." Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, rustling the flags in front of the town courthouse across the street. Inside, Judy dimmed the lights slightly. The last few customers filtered out, but neither Leonard nor the general moved. And then, as if on cue, a young man opened the diner door. New face, nervous smile, wearing an army hoodie. He looked around, unsure. Leonard gestured to the booth. "Come on," he said. "You just missed the good coffee." The young man smiled and walked over. The booth was full now. One man leaving service, one who had lived it, and one just about to begin. No uniforms, no spotlight, just stories and silence, and something deeper than all of it. The camera would fade slowly if this were a film. The kind of fade where the frame lingers just long enough to leave you wondering, how many people have you passed by without really seeing them? And if you walked into a diner like that tomorrow, would you know a hero if you saw one?